Today we'll be talking about VPN capacity with our very own Jesse Kielhorn.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley.
Awesome. If we go to the next slide, please. So before we get started, we just have a couple of housekeeping items. For those of you who have not been able to see our past sessions or may have a conflict in our upcoming sessions, you can go to the link below and see our YouTube videos. We have each session recorded each week and posted to YouTube. And so as long as you follow this link and we can send this out, you'll be able to keep up to date with our latest sessions of OK Google Tell Me How. And then we just want to talk about a little bit of what's happening next week as well. So next week we have a very exciting event. The guru of Kubernetes, Jesse Kielhorn, will be hosting with me on how Kubernetes can increase business agility and allows you to innovate faster. It's going to be a really fun event. Kelsey's going to open the floor up to questions as well. So if you were ever wondering to yourself, if I had 15 minutes with Jesse Kielhorn, what would I ask? This is your chance to do so. So we're very excited for next week and hope you guys can all attend as well.
Yeah, I highly encourage you guys checking out Jesse Kielhorn. He is a keynote speaker at KubeCon pretty much every year. And if there was a single person that sort of represents what we see here at Google for Kubernetes, it's definitely him.
With that being said, we're going to go on to a couple housekeeping items for this presentation. Everyone, if you can, please mute yourself. I know this is lunchtime. We want to make sure we can hear Jesse okay. So if you could please mute, that would be great. We also want to keep this event very interactive. So as Jesse's presenting, if you would, post your questions in the chat and I will ask him once we have a break. And so this way all of your questions can get answered in real time. No question's a dumb question. We want to keep this very interactive. So please post your questions and we'll get them answered as we go through the presentation. And then lastly, we'd love to know how we're doing and if there's anything you'd like to see next. So we'll be doing a quick survey at the end of the event. So please give us your feedback to let us know how we can improve and make these sessions even more fun. And with that being said, before we get to it and get to the main event, I'd like to introduce everyone to Jesse. Jesse's been at Google now for quite some time and is a customer engineer servicing the Southeast region. But for those of you who've tuned in before, you know, before we get started in any session, we have to ask our guest speaker a question. So this week, Jesse, our viewers would like to know, if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Any superpower? Can eating anything I want and not gain weight and remain healthy be a superpower?
Yes, because I would like that power as well.
I definitely want that one. That's the one I want.
Perfect. So now you guys have a little bit of insight on Jesse, a guy who loves to eat and also loves VPN. So Jesse, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. So most of you guys are here because you probably have some interest in networking, whether it's you currently have an issue with VPN capacity. I know I've had a number of my customers reach out to me about this, or you're interested in learning more about other solutions aside from VPNs to publish your internal apps to your end users or to your employees and possibly end users. So we'll start first with the traditional VPNs. During this time when folks are working from home pretty regularly, there's not a whole lot of network traffic coming from your corporate networks at this point. Probably it's all traversing through VPNs. And we've had a lot of folks just simply run out of capacity, whether they're hardware limits, right? A VPN is tough on the CPU of the concentrator device, firewalls, whatever it might be. And software companies have found ways to impose artificial limits as well. So you might have a beefy piece of equipment in there in the rack, but they're like, you know what, if you want more than 200 users, 250 users, whatever it is, you have to pay a pretty significant premium. Hopefully this work from home thing isn't permanent, so you don't want to necessarily lay out a whole bunch of capital to buy additional license or additional hardware. So maybe there's a way that we can solve this using the cloud. So how do we go about doing that? Essentially, you can provision VPN concentrator devices in the cloud and connect them back to your infrastructure in pretty much real time. We have a number of different offerings in the marketplace. OpenVPN just happened to be the top one, so I screenshotted that one, but there's a ton of different options. And what's nice about these is they allow you to leverage your existing licenses. Maybe you don't have one with OpenVPN, but your provider is probably there. Or you can actually lease licenses on a non-commit basis. So if you need another 200, whatever it is, licenses, you can go ahead and get those on a monthly OpEx model versus outlaying a whole bunch of money for CapEx for something you hopefully won't need for a long period of time. And then there's multiple ways you can deploy these. So there's a single VPN, or you can go into a high availability option, which I've drawn out here. So a little bit of chartness going on here. Hopefully you can stick with me. But essentially the traffic will come in. I don't think you can see my mouse, so I'm going to do this. So public internet here, traffic would come in and hit your OpenVPN gateways or whatever one you choose. Those would need to be in a region, essentially a VPC. The green here is a VPC that has a pair of gateways, a Cloud VPN gateway. So this is a Google product, the HA Cloud VPN gateway. And those would connect back to your on-premise gateways. So rather than tying up a large number of licenses with individual folks connecting via SSL or whatever other methodology you choose, you can get a single or pair of connections, typically less licensing, and then expand those out and have your end users connect here instead. In this case, you can see we have a couple other GCP resources. So if you had services already running in GCP, you can certainly attach this to additional resources here. That's made possible through inter-VPC routing. And a cloud router here really makes things easier. While it's not necessary, it essentially allows you to create the routes automatically using BGP. So as resources are created and destroyed both on-prem and in the cloud, those routes are added and removed as necessary. Couple things to note here. An HA VPN configuration allows for 4 nines of uptime, which is really good. And we've recently increased the speed of the connectivity on a specific tunnel to 3 gigabits per tunnel, or a total of 6 in a HA configuration. So very useful, lots of throughput available here if necessary. And of course, if you really wanted to set this up long-term, I have a number of customers that deploy VPN gateways on the cloud and then use a direct interconnect. So they have a private connection back to their data center as well. Couple options there. I haven't seen any questions come through just yet. Ashley, do we have anything on this?
We actually have one question. So this person wants to know at an application level that they have Apigee on-prem and we have applications in GCP. How can we secure, or how many ways, or which is the best way for the communication between on-prem and GCP?
Yeah, there's a number of options. It just depends on what works best for you guys. A VPN is a great way to do that, to essentially create connectivity between the cloud and your on-prem data center. You can absolutely route traffic to your Apigee instance that way. You can additionally use the next product we're going to talk about, which would be BeyondCorp, or a way to secure applications not using a VPN. And then there's all the physical connection options as well. So there's direct interconnects, partner interconnects, and then the non-physical, which would be the VPN.
Gotcha. And they were also wondering how is it compared to AWS?
In terms of ability to set up, it should be pretty similar. It's pretty straightforward. There's a GUI that walks you through setting this up. Like always, though, there is a RESTful API and a G Cloud SDK way to do this as well. So you can dynamically set up and tear down VPN connections, not the OpenVPN connections themselves, but the actual Cloud VPN modules. So you should be able to do that pretty quickly. In terms of throughput and SLA, I'm not exactly certain how it compares to what AWS offers, but I believe typically on the networking side, we tend to give more throughput and capacity than most other cloud providers. So I imagine that's going to be in line with what we see with the rest of the market.
And then the same person has a question on, will GCP help their team setting that up?
So if you have a customer engineer assigned to you, to your account, or you're familiar with your customer engineer and your salesperson, they can certainly look at getting resources allocated to you to do that. Additionally, we have a huge partner network that is always looking to get involved and looking for ways to help our customers better leverage the services offered by GCP. So those are the two paths that I would look at for getting assistance on setting this up.
Awesome. And Jesse, I think this is a very popular slide because we have one more question.
Sure.
Someone was wondering if their staff is located in Massachusetts and the closest Google data center is 900 miles away, why would we induce the extra latency going from MA to VA and back to MA again when we can just VPN to MA resources on-prem?
Sure. You don't necessarily need to do this in the sense that, if you feel you're going to introduce latency, this is purely, at this point in time when folks are out of on-prem VPN capacity, if you guys are humming along nicely and don't have any need for additional capacity or licensing, I wouldn't introduce any additional complication. One thing to note, though, is we do a lot of backhauling, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the request will traverse the public internet the entire way from Massachusetts to Virginia. We'll take that on at the closest hop on the Google network and then backhaul it that way. So you might gain a little bit of performance in that sense versus just traversing the public internet. But again, it really just depends. As long as you're not out of capacity, then I wouldn't worry about this to begin with.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse.
Awesome. Thank you for the questions, folks. If there are any more, please feel free. So with traditional VPNs talked about and how to expand those, I want to talk a little bit about the way we do things at Google. So me as a Googler, I'm working remotely. I typically do work remotely. I don't have a VPN client installed on my machine. I don't worry about whether I'm on or off it or anything like that. We use a product called BeyondCorp, which is an identity-aware proxy. So what this does is it allows us to remove the perimeter. There's not hard network security limits on things at Google. It's all built in across a multiple layered approach to defending our applications, our network, our products, and our customers. So in this sense, we're able to make sure our customers can access what they need to, our partners, our employees have the level of access they need, and then folks that come work with us. A large majority of folks that work at Google are actually technical contractors. So they'd be part of our vendor group, and so they get very specific access as well. And we do that through BeyondCorp. If you think about the way VPN was created, it really was for a time when networks were a lot simpler, applications were a lot simpler, and we assumed that the majority of folks worked from one office location or maybe a couple office locations, and it was pretty easy to hub and spoke all that together. That's really not the case anymore when you think about the way applications are deployed globally, and the workforce really is deployed globally now too. And so if I could use the right arrow keys, we needed a way to do things a little bit more effectively. And so rather than looking at application access at sort of a layer 4 approach, we want to move that up the layers, up the stack to about layer 7. And so now we're controlling the way folks interact with applications. So in this case, finance folks will only have access to what they're supposed to via the finance app, and the rest of the internal company doesn't have to worry about it. We want to do this from well-managed devices that we actually trust. From a location that we trust, using strong forms of authentication, so two-factor, YubiKeys, whatever it is, and using proper transport encryption. We don't want data leaking because someone forgot to type HTTPS or there's just some data sitting out there that shouldn't have been. And so we do that through a zero-trust security model. So again, we talk about identity and in context. So finance accessing finance things, HR accessing HR things. And there's a lot more that goes into just who that person's identity is when it goes to the set of context and how it's aware. And so we talked about this a little bit, where we're shifting away from the network layer because there's so few rules, and they're very hard rules. It's allow, deny typically, to the application layer, which gives us a lot more control. And so that looks a little bit like this. So you have a user that you want to build some trust with, and you have a device that you want to build some trust with. So one of the downsides of VPN is it's really tough to modulate who has access to what in terms of what device, right? So if I have a corporate laptop, that is the one device that is trusted by the corporation. And if something happens to it, especially now, if I were to drop my computer, I couldn't just go get another one from IT or whoever it is, right? I'm going to have a productivity gap. So being able to build device trust on more than one device will be really helpful. And then we need to have some front end that can terminate all of these different things and make logic decisions based on what we see in the rules engine. And then, of course, we have our enforcement. And we're doing all this to protect our web apps, VMs, SaaS applications, infrastructure, and so on. And from the Google side, these are the products that all align to make this possible, right? So BeyondCorp is a package of all of these different pieces of Google technology and products that come together to serve one purpose, which is securing your applications and giving you better fine-grained control over those and how you interact with them. And so I won't read through every one of these different products that we use, but I figured I'd put them up here for you to see.
Hey, Jesse, we have one question.
Sure.
Is there a difference between the 4-layer approach is there a difference between layer 4 approach and layer 7 approach?
Absolutely. The biggest thing is the ability to understand a little bit more about the user. So at layer 4, I can see like IP address. I can do some inference of where the geo for that IP address is. But I don't get to do a whole lot more from there. I don't get to see what the request is. I don't get to see all the headers that went through and make decisions based on those. So in this case, right, I can see that an IP address, if I do it at layer 4, was connected from, I live in Atlanta, and I have IP address 1234, and my session age, was good for 2 days or whatever, and that's fine. I accessed it at noon. When you move it up to layer 7, I have access to the device itself that's making these requests. So a couple examples, my cell phone, when I check my corporate email, my device has a Google Policy app on it that makes sure my phone has a passkey on a passcode to it, and not just a 4-number passcode. I actually have to have a complicated passcode. It makes sure that the request. So my last request, say I had 98% battery, and I had all the RAM chips had serial numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in my phone. Right? They lined up. The next request comes from, I don't know, someplace in California, and the battery is now 20%, and the RAM chips don't match for the serial numbers. So I can now see that second request, while it's under my name, and they might have spoofed my IP address, say they actually are smart enough to spoof the IP address that I made the initial request from, no longer has all the matching points from the last known good identity that I had. So we know we can block that device and that request. And then we can report on that to go track down what happened and why someone else has my information. And if we're using strong 2-factor authentication, like a YubiKey or something like that, even if they were to somehow spoof a couple of these different items that we're looking at, they still wouldn't have gotten past the strong 2-factor challenge. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yes, that makes sense to me. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. So not only can we create these context-aware access controls to standard web applications, right? It's easy to look at headers and do some of that stuff, but we can actually do it for SSH and RDP, all the GCP APIs as well. So if folks are leveraging a bunch of those, we can contextually lock down control to those. This is built into G Suite. And then we can, using the previous VPN and other interconnect technologies I showed you on the last slides, actually connect back to your web apps or non-web apps on-prem or on cloud. One of the examples that I'll show you actually has a micro hotel chain. I'm not really going to use their name, but actually connecting using BeyondCorp to secure access to their internal applications on a different cloud. A couple customers here that use it. And what's nice is this doesn't have to be something that you use specifically inside Google Cloud, like we mentioned on the last slide. This can be your first soiree, if you will, into using GCP. So it's a great place to get started. And of course, if you have paid any attention to GKE and Kubernetes in general, you must have heard of Anthos. Essentially, that's our ability to manage Kubernetes clusters not deployed in Google Cloud. And of course, this works very well with BeyondCorp as well. So that's all well and good. You sat through some slides, but let's see how this actually works, right? So typical IT deployment for standard VPN, right? You have an HR internal application that is deployed, and it is protected by a standard VPN. So there's a firewall, and employees must use their specific laptop to connect to this that has been provisioned by IT with the proper certificates and such. So this isn't ideal, right? Customers or your customers, your end employees and whatnot, want to do this a little easier. Why can't this be like accessing Gmail? Gmail works, right? We trust that it's secure. They say it's not practical to use personal devices. Again, security does not want non-corp devices on the network because, again, VPN gives you access to the full network depending on how you've got it configured. And IT just simply doesn't have the resources to manage non-corporate devices. So they do a little research and discover IAP, Identity Aware Proxy. So now we have a new deployment here. hr.zotkicks.com now has a Identity Aware Proxy in front of it. Essentially, anyone that has a policy assigned to them called all employees can now access this. So this would be set up in Cloud Identity and IAM. So they enable the global load balancer, which is where all of this lives, and they add the policy there. So at this point, now employees can access their HR stuff. They can request time off from their phone, whatever it might be. And the security department essentially gains a little bit of security here. So they can use identity-based controls so that only employees can access this. They can reduce network level exposure on the back end, right? So now we don't have that device exposed to the entire network. Even if though it's a corporate device, there's plenty of ransomware attacks and such that happen. The last thing we want to do is let that spread. And because Google is fronting this on the Google front end itself, you've now inherited some planet scale level DDoS protection, and we're terminating TLS there as well. So you have extremely high security. So a little bit of ease of work for the IT folks as well, because now you don't have to manage a VPN client. In this case, the latency is lower since we're not traversing huge distances to get to a VPN, which then might not be very well performing. Part two, we now have some contractors that are interested in doing some work for our company. So HR doesn't have enough folks. They hire some contractors, and they need to be able to access the HR platform. So in this case, they will work from their company office. So the contractors will work from the Acme office, and they will use their own Acme PCs. So on the Zotkicks side, they say, okay, that's fine, but they need to use secure authentication. So we're talking strong two-factor here. And we are indeed going to limit it just to the office. They don't get to travel elsewhere and access their HR work. It's just from the office. So consider it done. How does this work? Well, we essentially add these folks to the IAM process here, and we create a rule that looks at some context and says, okay, the Acme office has 35. Whatever this IP address is here as a location to access from. So as long as we have those two provisions set up, they are then granted access to the HR platform itself. And here's where the policy would go. And essentially, we have now there an HR contractor, which is the IAM identity. So that's our identity portion of this. And then the context-aware part is from Acme office IP address. So with those two, as long as they're met, they're good to go. And we have green check marks for being done. Hits the load balancer, they're ready to rock and roll. Acme contractor takes laptop to coffee shop. Coffee shop IP address does not match office IP address of 35. Whatever, and they are blocked from accessing the HR web app. A couple changes that need to be worked into the application. So in this case, the HR app has been modified just slightly. So it'll now accept a token from IAP. So at this point, we're going to use a OAuth signal rather than a username and password because IAM will have the user identity in there. You can tie that back to LDAP or any number of other identity systems if you need to for having an understanding of who belongs to your organization. But that's the way you do it. You would no longer have like a login to the hr.zotkix application. You would then use the token as provided by IAM and the Contextaware proxy. At this point, things are going well for the contractors, and they need to be given a little bit more information. They need to give more access. They're going to do a little bit more. So what we're looking at here is contractors will now also have Zotkix email addresses. So they're going to get Gmail accounts. In those Gmail accounts, because they're considered secure by Zotkix, they're going to receive sensitive information about what's going to be emailed to them. So at this point, we want to have a little bit more control over what's going to happen on those computers that the Acme company is going to be accessing from. So in this case, we're going to require a screen lock. So you can't just walk away from your computer and after 5 minutes, your screen is still unlocked, right? It should lock at a pretty reasonably quick time. And the disk should be encrypted. So if the laptop is turned off or the desktop's turned off and someone steals the computer or the drive, at least the data won't be there ripe for the picking. So we're going to do that for pretty much anyone at this point. So anyone on Zotkix Gmail account, contractors and employees, those are going to be the requirements for accessing Gmail. So to do this, essentially the contractors will get a message from Zotkix IT saying essentially these are the options you have to have set up on your machine, and this is done through a Chrome extension. We have the BeyondCorp Chrome extension installed, so it does a number of different things on our machines, and some of these are included here. And to do this, you essentially just click here, follow some instructions, install the extension, and you're good to go. And so that will start adding additional steps here. So we're going to start doing some checking of devices. And we're going to make sure that to access Gmail, you're going to have those flags set on your machine. So essentially, the Gmail access will be only with device status is acceptable. And so we're going to achieve device status acceptable via these couple flags here, which have the screen lock enabled and disk encryption enabled. And so now we've introduced a new, here we go, a new option here, which is part of that device aware information. And so now we're going to check device status as we make a request to the Gmail service here. So we will have a number of things that happen, and all of these checks have to pass before the person will be granted the access to the application itself. So here is an example of how this works with another customer, that micro hotel use case. So you can see that they have a number of policies here. The biggest one being if a group is if the person belongs to the contractors group and they're using a core Chromebook, they can then access whatever GenSys is. So gensys.xyz.com lives on the global load balancer. The identity aware proxy is enabled. So we're going to go ahead and check the device, make sure it belongs to corporate. We're going to check their identity, make sure they're part of the contractors group, their IAM permissions to see what part of GenSys they should be accessing. And then we'll do our other context-aware type checks on this folk, whether they are in the right location, using all the stuff that they should be. At that point, they will then be pushed through the on-prem connector device, which essentially is their version of VPN. So in this case, they have a direct connect between GCP and AWS. And from there, the AWS gateway takes over and gives them access to the GenSys system based on the tokens that they are assigned from the BeyondCorp proxy. If you try to circumvent the plans, much like the contractor going to the coffee shop to access HR things, you will be denied. So if there is no device status, you've uninstalled the Chrome plugin, you've made changes that you shouldn't, and you do not pass your device status, access will be denied. And you will no longer be able to log in or do anything at that point until you fix your problem. And that is all that I have for you at this point on BeyondCorp. I'm happy to take a couple more questions if there are any. Otherwise, I think there's a game that comes next. Ashley, do we have questions?
It does not look like we have any more questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to put in the chat or unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. But oh, we have a question. Is BeyondCorp only for web-based applications?
It is not. So you can pass other types of traffic, but it is less configurable for stuff like SSH and RDP. So things that don't pass through HTTP, HTTPS are available, but less configurable.
What about custom client applications?
So they'll fall under anything that isn't HTTP, HTTPS. So SSH and RDP were just specific examples because those use other protocols. They are in a more sort of yes/no decision-making tree rather than having the ability to limit specific parts of applications and making super advanced decisions based on some of the layer 7 logic that's available.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Yeah, Jesse, Pradeep here. Actually, you answered my first question, right? Previously you were saying that how to get the security between the cloud and the on-prem. You give them a little bit of better options like VPN, BeyondCorp, physical direct. These are all the things that you have given as a solution. But which one do you prefer the most? As in, for example, I'm working for a financial institution like a bank or a mutual funds company. So where will you go with that? What will be your suggestion in that case?
Yeah, so I've worked in a number of corporations, having had access on both sides. The BeyondCorp solution is significantly easier for me as an end user. I know I have access to specifically what I need to get my job done without having to really interact with anyone else because the my corporate laptop is broken or something like that. When I actually forgot a Chromebook at one point for a customer meeting, so I went and grabbed another Chromebook from Best Buy. So I own a $200 Chromebook someplace. Was able to get signed in to my Google account. It provisioned the certs. It proved the device was safe, and then was able to access the corporate network to get my presentation and continue on with my day as if I hadn't done something silly and left my actual computer behind. So in that sense, because there's all the ability to build in trust based on the devices and the security keys and such, it's just a lot easier for the end user. Once you get your head around building the policies and tying them to IAM and tying them to the specific users in your organization, it'll be a lot easier to manage as well.
So you're talking about the mostly networking concept of it, but I was talking about an application level. For example, my applications are in AWS or GCP, right? That I have previously explained to you. So I wanted to come back to my on-prem with a call. I have some other applications in on-prem. There should be communication between these two applications, on-prem and GCP. So you are saying that BeyondCorp will be a best candidate to talk in between these two apps?
I see. Okay. So yeah, so shuttling data between apps and, in the cloud and on-prem, that's not something that I would do with BeyondCorp. That I would use a VPN or a direct connect for. If you're going to use more than probably a gigabit or so of connectivity on a pretty consistent basis, it makes sense to start looking at dedicated physical connections rather than using VPNs. But at that point, yeah, for apps communicating between one another on a pretty regular basis, I would absolutely use a VPN for that.
Okay, so but
misunderstood the first question.
You are sort of extending it to be another on-prem, right? It means that you are making GCP or AWS to be an extra on-prem environment.
You're essentially making it so that your apps don't have any sense of locality, right? It doesn't matter whether it runs on-prem, AWS, GCP. They're all interconnected that way.
Okay, that makes sense. So, which one, within VPN and direct interconnect, which one you prefer, and what is the latency between these two? What will be the latency part of it?
I mean, latency I can't necessarily answer just because it depends so much on where you are, which region you're using, how your data center is connected, which providers, that sort of thing. Typically for higher throughput applications, the direct interconnect is going to be better simply because it's a physical connection that you can have more control over. So you can deploy jumbo frames and things like that to try to mitigate latency. Whereas a VPN is great for companies just getting started. I see the majority of my customers start with a VPN, see the topology, get them connected, get data flowing, understand how it all plays together. And then once they've established that and they start pretty heavily leveraging both the cloud and their on-prem facilities, they typically move to a direct interconnect.
Oh, direct interconnect. Okay, fine. Thanks. That works for me.
No problem. Scott,
hey,
I saw
Hey, Jesse.
you.
Oh, yep.
Okay, let me switch over to.
We have another question from, like you said, Scott. Scott wants to know, does BeyondCorp support the full suite of TCP ports? Our customers' clients' apps use random TCP ports in their Ethereum communication process.
Are the ports randomized per application per use, or is it you've set a series of ports that you use? Because that'll make a difference. If you want to unmute and just chat, that's probably easier than typing.
He said per connection.
That might be a little bit more difficult if it's randomized per connection. I don't know the specifics of using randomized ports on BeyondCorp, but if you want to send me an email, I can look into the documentation and get you a little bit more information on that. I think my email's on screen right now if you want to grab that.